The long purple hair naturally belonged to Ziyin, but her body currently radiated a terrifying pressure that frightened Xiaoyin. This pressure originated from the liquid-like golden sword that she held in her hand. The Southern Dragon King looked at his missing arm with dull eyes. After having transformed into a dragon arm, the defenses of his body had already reached an extremely frightening level. Even if he were to receive a direct blow from a 5-star Do Shang, it would be impossible for his arm to be cut off with such ease. However, dragon-slaying sword? Is it the dragon-slaying sword? You have summoned the dragon-slaying sword? This dull state continued for an instant before he was felt the intense pain transmitted from his lost arm. The Southern Dragon King suddenly lifted his head. He looked at Ziyin walking through the air. Finally, his eyes paused onto the liquid-like golden sword that she held. His eyes shrank to the size of pinholes as a shocked exclamation containing great disbelief was roared from his mouth. The heart of the Western Dragon King by the side also wildly shook. Those bright red eyes revealed a shocked expression in them. His entire body trembled as he looked at the liquid-like golden sword in Ziyin's hand. A horrified expression finally appeared on his face. The dragon-slaying sword was not a weapon. Instead, it was an extremely powerful Do skill owned by the ancient Void Dragon tribe. This Do skill could only be unleashed by the ancient dragon that possessed the purest royal bloodline. Even the 3 great dragon kings were unable to use it, but none of them had ever expected the current Ziyin to be able to summon it. It should be known that even the last Dragon Emperor had to reach the strength of a 6-star Do Shang before being able to barely summon the dragon-slaying sword. However, Ziyin was only at the initial 4-star Do Shang class. The dragon-slaying sword, as its name suggests, was specifically used to slay dragons. This could be considered a technique that only belonged to the Dragon Emperor. Unless one's strength far surpassed the ancient dragon wielding the dragon-slaying sword, the ancient dragon would be as weak as being curd under the sword. Dragon-slaying sword. Everyone on the Eastern Dragon Island froze at this moment. They raised their heads. All of their eyes contained a rich fear as they looked at the figure standing in empty space. Even an expert like Xian Imo involuntarily felt his body tremble. They were all feeling a fear and terror that originated from their bloodline. The dragon-slaying sword was the thing that all ancient void dragon feared the most within their hearts. The Dragon Emperor has actually summoned the dragon-slaying sword. The many elders on the Eastern Dragon Island trembled as they looked at the empty realm. They were so excited that tears rolled down their faces. A Dragon Emperor who could summon the dragon-slaying sword was a true Dragon Emperor. Hence, from this moment on, Ziyin finally possessed the authority to command the entire ancient dragon tribe. The dragon-slaying sword has already appeared. It is obvious who the Dragon Emperor is. All of you should stop being obstinate. Be careful of ending up in a terrible state when the dragon-slaying sword descends on your head in the future. The first elder from the Eastern Dragon Island floated in the air and roared out loud while holding a dragon-shaped walking stick in his hand. The expressions of some of the warriors from the 3 Dragon Islands changed upon hearing this roar. Even Xian Mon and the other 2 elders did not dare to utter a single word at this moment. The pressure of the dragon-slaying sword radiated across the empty realm, causing them to feel extremely uneasy. They felt as though the thing that could slay a dragon, as if it were slaughtering a chicken, would suddenly descend and fall on their heads.
Bang bang.
Silence covered the Eastern Dragon Island. A moment later, some warriors from the 3 islands could not endure this pressure that originated from their bloodline. They knelt down to the empty space in the distance. Soon after this first group of people knelt down, an increasing number of ancient dragons began to make a choice after struggling, and in the end, they chose to surrender. The expressions of Xian Imo and the other powerful upper echelons of the 3 islands gradually paled upon seeing more warriors kneel. They were aware that the situation today had already been decided. In the future, the Eastern Dragon Island would definitely far surpass the three Great Dragon Island. Hurry up and leave. The Western Dragon King forcefully suppressed the horror in his heart when the situation on the Eastern Dragon Island situation drastically changed. A furious roar sounded and his body instantly pulled back. The Southern Dragon King was unconcerned about his broken arm. His face was filled with shock as he pulled back. Traitors! Dragon-slaying sword. Execute! Ziyan's purple eyes stared at the two retreating figures with cold indifference. An icy bone-chilling voice was emitted from her mouth, and the dragon-slaying sword was slowly lifted and swung at the Western Dragon King. The sword swung down. A strange fluctuation rippled from the tip of the sword with lightning-like speed. The Western Dragon Island sensed something the moment the sword came swinging down. The terror in his eyes became even more intense as a low roar was emitted from his mouth. Layer after layer of dragon scales rose over his head, body, arms, and half of his body. These dragon scales contained a strange luster, as though they were unbreakable. However, this extremely powerful defense crumbled in a short instant. That strange energy emitted from the dragon-slaying sword penetrated space itself and gently slashed across his body. Grug! The fluctuation passed by, and the expression of the Western Dragon King paled immediately. A mouthful of fresh blood was wildly spat out as he lowered his head in shock. He could see a large, savage-looking wound sliding down his shoulder as it headed toward his waist. The tough dragon scales covering his body split like being curd. The slice was extremely smooth as fresh blood rolled down beneath the dragon scales. One was even vaguely able to see his moving internal organs inside. Just a slash was all it took to seriously injure the Western Dragon King. The might of the dragon-slaying sword could indeed be described as terrifying against an ancient void dragon. Ah! A miserable screech sounded from the Western Dragon King's mouth as an earth-shaking cry. An intense pain that penetrated deep into his bones caused his body to tremble. Wave after wave of dizziness continued to assault his mind. The Southern Dragon King, who was a short distance from the Western Dragon King, felt his limbs turn icy cold after seeing the slice form. He violently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He ceased having any thoughts of rescuing others at this moment. The only thought he had was to hurry up and leave. The might of the dragon-slaying sword had almost caused him to collapse. Gulp! Xiaoyan swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His heart was full of shock. He had personally experienced just how frightening the defensive strength of those three were. Even his strongest extermination Fire Lotus had only injured them, but this gentle slash from Ziyan's sword had nearly taken the life of the Western Dragon King. Hurry up and escape. The Southern Dragon King emitted a roar as his body swiftly retreated. That Western Dragon King also understood that he would simply end up dying if he remained behind. He grabbed the savage-looking wound on his chest, maneuvered the Do Chi within his body, and crazily retreated. Qi! Ziyan slowly walked past Xiaoyan. Her eyes were cold and indifferent as she watched those two flee. She once again lifted the dragon-slaying sword in her hand and gently slashed it down. The moment this sword slashed down, Xiaoyan saw a small lock of long purple hair belonging to Ziyan turn into a grayish-white color. This dragon-slaying sword is exhausting Ziyan's life force. Xiaoyan's heart shook violently the moment he witnessed her hair change. Since you wish to corner us to death, I will have an all-out fight with you. A feeling of imminent death immediately rose within the Western and Southern Dragon King's hearts as Ziyan's sword slashed down. They had both seriously injured. They would likely be dead if this slash struck them. Moreover, their prior experience told them that they would not be able to escape the dragon-slaying sword. The both of them were forced into a state of madness as a large mouthful of pale golden blood was suddenly spat out of their mouths. Dragon Emperor Bell. The golden blood swiftly spread in front of the both of them and turned into a 100-foot-tall golden bell, which wrapped around the western and southern dragon kings. Clang! That strange fluctuation approached with lightning-like speed after the large golden bell was formed. Finally, it smashed with the large golden bell.
Bang!
That large golden bell emitted waves of circular ripples the moment the loud sound was emitted. Chi! The large golden bell exploded, and the lingering ripple struck the western and southern dragon kings. One leg from each of them flew off. Within a short few minutes, the two great dragon kings had become crippled dragon kings. Do you think that traitors are worthy of unleashing the strength of a dragon emperor? A cold smile rose on Ziyan's face as she looked at the extremely miserable duo. The dragon-slaying sword in her hand once again mercilessly slashed down. Grug! This sword was not successfully slashed down, as Ziyan's delicate figure trembled after she had just lifted it up. A mouthful of dark golden blood was spat out of her mouth as her expression paled. Although this slash was not completed, there was still a fluctuation emitted. It swiftly rushed toward the southern and western dragon kings. In their seriously wounded state, the two of them could only sense the ripple grow closer with shock and fear. Swoosh! However, a figure hurried over with lightning-like speed after the two were about to be struck by that ripple. It was the Northern Dragon King, who had yet to show himself. He grabbed the two of them by a shoulder, and a mouthful of golden blood was spat out. Subsequently, he sped up and disappeared from the empty realm within a couple of flashes. Ah! A miserable screech was emitted from the direction they had fled soon after they had disappeared. Clearly, they did not escape the mysterious fluctuation. The three great dragon kings have been defeated. The bodies of Xian Mo's group on the eastern dragon island immediately turned icy cold after they watched the three miserable figures flee. Their bodies began to rise from the ground as they fled in all directions, along with some of the three islands' elders. It would be suicidal for them to remain behind at this moment. What a terrifying sword! Xiaoyan looked to where the three dragon kings had disappeared before his eyes shifted to the seemingly liquid-like sword in Ziyan's hand. He involuntarily inhaled a gentle breath of cold air in his heart. Grug! Ziyan's body did not move even as the three dragon kings escaped. Her purple eyes were filled with a cold intent as she stared in the direction the trio had vanished. A moment later, that seemingly liquid-like golden sword in her hand shook and scattered into nothing. A mouthful of fresh blood was spat from Ziyan's mouth while the dragon-slaying sword vanished. Her body also began to slowly fall. Xiaoyan was startled upon seeing her fall. He hurriedly moved forward and caught her. His heart involuntarily ached after seeing her extremely pale face. It seemed that using the dragon-slaying sword greatly exhausted Ziyan. Moreover, this kind of exhaustion did not appear to be simple doqi exhaustion.
Infine.
Ziyan's eyes looked at Xiaoyan as she lay in his embrace. A somewhat forceful smile surfaced on her face. Xiaoyan involuntarily shook his head upon hearing her response. He simply hugged Ziyan and sat down in the air. The condition his body was in was also extremely terrible. If the bloodline strength that had been emitted from within his heart had not healed a lot of his damaged medians, it was likely that he would have been paralyzed and left a cripple. Even though he wasn't a cripple, the current Xiaoyan was also at his limits. The injuries he had received from fighting the three great dragon kings alone were too serious. Well, eat up. These are the danwan that you enjoy eating the most? Xiaoyan pulled out a jade bottle from his storage ring and poured a couple of round pills out. He waved them at Ziyan and laughed. Are you still treating me like a little girl? Ziyan involuntarily rolled her eyes at Xiaoyan after hearing his teasing words. She unceremoniously grabbed those pills and stuffed them into her mouth, but the way she ate these pills was undoubtedly more refined than before. She did not simply devour them like when she was a little girl. Dragon Emperor. The Eastern Dragon Island's first elders group swiftly flew over from below, after which they halted a short distance from Ziyin and respectfully called out. They were quite tactful. All of them merely glanced at the two of them before hurriedly lowering their heads. First Elder, is the Eastern Dragon Island all right? A faint redness surfaced on Ziyin's pale face after seeing these elders lower their heads. She swiftly recovered her calmness and struggled to stand from Xiao Yan's embrace. Her somewhat weak voice regained a pressure to it. Reporting to your majesty, the Dragon Island is fine. Many members of the 3 great Dragon Islands have fled. However, there are quite a number of members from the ancient Void Dragon tribe who have chosen to remain on our Eastern Dragon Island. The first elder respectfully replied. The people he had mentioned were naturally those from the 3 islands who had knelt earlier. I temporarily accept them and keep an eye on them. There might be a spy from the 3 islands among them. Ziyin slightly nodded and replied. Understood. What about the 3 great dragon kings? The first elder nodded before asking a question in a hesitant manner. The 3 great dragon kings were the greatest obstacle to the reunification of the ancient dragon tribe. The western and southern dragon kings had their limbs severed by me. Even if they can recover in the future, their strength will definitely be diminished. Just the northern dragon king alone will not be able to achieve anything great. Once the eastern dragon island recuperates, we will launch a counterattack and complete the unification. A sharp expression flashed across Ziyin's purple eyes as she spoke in a faint voice. Perhaps it was because she had the constitution of a dragon phoenix, but there was a pressure flowing from her words when she spoke. In the face of this pressure, even Xiao Yan quietly felt a little speechless. It was difficult to imagine that extremely greedy little girl would become this fierce after growing up. Understood. The first elders group sighed in relief after hearing her response. They respectfully replied. None of them dared to remain any longer as they bowed and flew back to the Eastern Dragon Island. Ziyin, who had wielded the dragon-slaying sword earlier, caused them to feel fear within their hearts. Ziyin turned her head only after seeing the first elder and the others leave, only to see Xiao Yan's somewhat strange expression. She was startled as she asked, "What is it?" "Ugh, the Dragon Emperor, this is a really big hat to wear." Xiao Yan shook his head and sighed. Compared to this Ziyin, he still preferred that innocent and lively little girl who liked to stay beside him all day for a meal. It is not as though I have put on airs in front of you. Why do you need to sigh? Ziyin glanced at Xiao Yan. She suddenly approached him. An evil smile appeared on her exquisite face as she said, "Don't you like this appearance? I frequently saw you placing your eyes on elder sister Kailin's body in the past." Cough, nonsense. Xiao Yan's face turned red as he glanced at Ziyin. That tone of hers like the greedy and heartless little from before. Hee. Ziyin covered her mouth and softly laughed. After which, she quickly stopped laughing, looked at Xiao Yan, and said, "Thank you very much this time around. If you had not held off the 3 dragon kings off for such a long time and seriously injured them, this immature dragon-slaying sword of mine would not have been able to create such a deterrence. It is not necessary to thank me. I have put in a lot of effort during this period because of you." Xiao Yan rolled his eyes. In order to help Ziyin resolve the trouble she faced, he had thought of many ways to pull the 9 serene deep-ground python tribe to her side. Moreover, he had even killed and captured the experts from the Heaven Demon Phoenix tribe along the way. He threatened them with hostages in order to force them to retreat. After having hurried over, he had even engaged in a bloody, all-out battle with the 3 great dragon kings. Had it not been because of his strong body, he might have really ended up dying. Of course, given Xiao Yan's character, he would naturally not mention what he had done for her. He waved his hand and rushed back to the Eastern Dragon Island. His body had only just moved when waves of intense pain from his twitching meridians was emitted. His face twitched as he gently inhaled a breath of cool air. It has been so many years, but you still like to put on a strong front. You should recuperate on the Eastern Dragon Island during this period of time. A fragrance was transmitted from beside Xiao Yin as he inhaled a deep breath. He sensed his arm was lifted up, after which it made contact with smooth and soft skin. He turned his head, only to find Ziyin supporting him. She moved her body and flew toward the Dragon Island in the distance. Ziyin's hair danced as she flew. Pieces of it gently swept over Xiao Yan's face and appeared entirely free of worry. The big fight on the Eastern Dragon Island had finally come to an end, with the Eastern Dragon Island obtaining a major victory. The strength of the Eastern Dragon Island would undoubtedly soar after this battle. It would far surpass the 3 Great Dragon Islands. On the other hand, the 3 Great Dragon Islands would show signs of declining. The dragon-slaying sword was the symbol of the Dragon Emperor. In the past, many of the warriors from the 3 islands did not believe Ziyin was the Dragon Emperor. However, this doubt would undoubtedly vanish following the incident today. Summoning the dragon-slaying sword by the true Dragon Emperor created a pressure that originated from within their bloodlines and would cause those from the 3 Great Dragon Islands to make a choice after some considerations. In the future, the 3 Great Dragon Islands would no longer have the opportunity to attack the Eastern Dragon Island. They would change from being in control of the situation to only being able to respond. All they could do was helplessly wait for the Eastern Dragon Island to gather its strength before it finally eliminated the 3 islands to complete the unification of the ancient dragon tribe. Of course, quite a bit of time was still required before getting to that stage. The Eastern Dragon Island fell into a busy atmosphere after the defeat of the 3 Great Dragon Kings. There were many things to resolve after the battle, especially since the Eastern Dragon Island had gained many new residents. While the entire Eastern Dragon Island fell into a busy atmosphere after the big battle, Xiao Yin had found a hidden room and announced that he was taking a retreat. The injuries that he had suffered this time around had really been too serious. He had even nearly ended up dead. Hence, he needed to adjust the condition of his body to avoid a sequela that would impede his advancement. Otherwise, his losses would really be unbearable. A faint sandalwood fragrance lingered within a quiet room. Xiao Yin sat down on a stone platform that was made from cold jade. Both of his eyes were shut. A rich energy surged around his body. It followed his breathing cycle as it slowly entered his body. It had been 10 days since Xiao Yin had entered this chamber. The extremely serious injuries within his body had gradually recovered. Despite the improvements of his injuries, Xiao Yin did not show any signs of waking. His body seemed to have turned into a stone statue. He had been maintaining this unmoving stance since he had entered. However, no one was aware that the calm, mountain-like expression on the surface did not mirror the true situation within his body like one would imagine.
Bang bang.
The heart within Xiao Yan's body slowly pounded. A tendril of purple-red blood would appear each time it pounded. This blood would slowly seep out of his heart before finally spreading in all directions. This string of purple-red blood seemed to possess an extremely terrifying temperature. The meridians and muscles it flowed through would suddenly boil. This kind of boiling did not cause Xiao Yin to feel any intense pain. Instead, it vaguely carried the mysterious feeling of being reborn. Xiao Yin did not know why this was happening. Soon after this retreat of his began, that newly formed bloodline strength that had been hidden deep within his heart had automatically flowed out at this moment. This strand of bloodline strength might appear a little weak, but it possessed an extremely mysterious effect. The reason the serious injuries in his body were healed within 10 days was mostly because of this purple-red blood. Although Xiao Yin did not understand why this purple-red blood was acting opposite of its usual quietness, He did not purposefully control it. He let it do its thing. Of course, the reason why he allowed it to act as it pleased was because he gradually sensed his strength slightly increase each time the purple-red blood circulated around his body. The purple-red blood seemed to be continuously tempering and refining his body. This refinement was undoubtedly good for Xiaoyan. Hence, he did not obstruct the process. With the flow of time, he gradually entered a slumber-like state. His heart continued to beat slowly in a rhythmic fashion as he descended into a slumber. Wisps of purple-red blood flowed out and tirelessly refined Xiaoyan's meridians and flesh. Of course, with this temperament, Xiaoyan's aura slowly rose while he was deep in his slumber,